and then we'll begin. Just give it another couple of seconds to let everyone log in. You can just see keep a couple more people still just logging in. Okay, great. So I think I'll start. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first PlanTech webinar in the era of COVID, and it's actually PlanTech in the era of COVID. That's our theme. So my name is Justin Kleiger. I'm a senior urbanist at the Catapult at Connected Places. For those who aren't familiar with the organisation, we used to be called Future Cities Catapult. We're a UK-based innovation lab that looks into all things to do with digitisation and innovation in the built environment and cities. We've been looking at the concept of PlanTech for the last few years, in fact, looking at how you can digitise the planning system and how you can revolutionise and innovate those processes. And with the emergence of the COVID-19 crisis, we've seen obviously a dramatic change in the way planners are doing their jobs, and the fact that their jobs just can't be carried out in the traditional ways. So we decided we'd set up this event as an open dialogue or a forum to allow people to discuss the new ways of working that are emerging, but to also learn from people and organisations about what's working for them, what's not working for them, and how things can be done better, with the hope, obviously, to accelerate digital planning in the future. So this is an informal event, so bear with us if there are any technical issues or just if, things don't go to plan, but just a few housekeeping things. This is a secure channel, so there shouldn't be any issues with Zoom bombing or Zoom hacking. You all know where your own toilets and fire escapes are, and we are recording this, and there will be a copy of this event sent out at the end. Via email. So if you'd like to see, you can follow it up. And if you are having trouble with the Zoom connection, there is a YouTube version live streaming, and the link is available on our CPC Connected Places Catapult website. So if we could just move to the agenda slide, please. Today, we're going to have 3 speakers presenting to us. The first one will be Ian Harvey, the joint founder and executive director of Civic Voice. Following Ian will be Jason Hawthorne, the founding director and chief digital officer at VU.CITY. And then following Jason will be Michelle Isme, product manager, and Claudia Hopkins, a designer, both from Unboxed. We'll be following the speakers with Q&As. Now, please use the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen if you'd like to ask a question to the panel. My colleague and the digital planning team lead, Kate Taylor, is monitoring the Q&As, and she'll jump on later on to present the questions. So just a couple of points. If you do have a particular question for a particular panelist, please make sure you drop their name in front of your question so we know who to pose that question to. And so we'll have some time at the end to ask those questions. So without any further delay, I think I'm going to hand on over to Ian for the first presentation, please.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me along today. And it's great to be able to embrace a meeting whereby I've not had to be on a 6 o'clock train, juggling along the country to be able to sort of participate. I'm based up here in Liverpool, I know we've got people from all over the world who are participating in this seminar today, which basically demonstrates the power of our technology. For those that don't know me, I'm the Executive Director and the joint founder of Civic Voice, the national charity for the civic society movement. And as this is an informal session, I've got about 10 minutes. I'm just going to talk about the good, the bad and the ugly of my experience over the past couple of weeks participating in some local councils' virtual planning meetings. And I'll be talking about how some of the councils are going from the physical to the digital. But I'll be talking about sort of trust in planning, transparency in planning, and might even mention a little bit of testing and the importance of tracking as well. Next slide, please. So over the past couple of weeks, Civic Voice have attended a number of virtual planning meetings by local authorities, and I've actually attended 8 myself, ranging from during the daytime to evening events. And I would like to now think as myself as a national expert on councils and virtual planning meetings, because why not? What else have we got going on at the moment but to participate and to see how councils are engaging, are learning and are using this technology. Civic Voice, we are a national charity and we work with community groups in 70% of local authorities across the country who are major participants in the planning system, and 56% of our members have said to us that they have already attended a virtual planning meeting or they intend on participating over the next couple of weeks. And within the Civic Voice manifesto for the last general election, we said we see a big future of digital and technology within the planning system. So we may have got here in a different way with COVID-19, but it's important that we learn from what is happening and ensure that we actually sort of learn and spread that best practice. Next slide, please. Everything about Civic Voice is embedded in we want more people to have a voice in the local area. We want more people to sort of shape what they do and to sort of participate. And this quote I have on the slide here is from Miriam Levin, who is the DCMS's head of community action in the Office for Civil Society. And you can see that 57% of people do want to be involved in local decision making. They do want to get involved. They want to know what's going on in a local park. They want to shape their local built environment. But unfortunately, according to the government's own research, only 26% of people actually feel they can influence these decisions. So whilst people want to, they don't feel as though they actually can. And we know that when consultations happen, and when people's views are ignored, it is more damaging for trust than if the people had never been asked their opinion in the first place. So essentially, it's much better when you're doing consultation and engaging people to ignore them and actually go and do what you do. That's less damaging than actually asking people for their opinion and then ignoring them and going forward. And I say that because trust in the planning system is a major issue and something we have to be very much aware of. Next slide. And that's not me saying that. That's Grosvenor, UK, who said that July last year when they undertook the biggest ever survey of the planning system of members of the public. And we see that people do not trust local authorities or developers when it comes to making decisions in the planning system. People feel as though that too much power has gone to developers and that decisions that affect our local area are made by people that don't necessarily live there. Civic Voice, we see planning technology as a great way to actually sort of change that and to build trust and to build transparency and make people more aware of what is actually happening. But trust and transparency, I've put 2 quotes up that I picked up off Twitter, and the one at the top you can see is a journalist who's talking about a development in Manchester that's basically saying another development has come forward that it will now go forward under delegated powers rather than having to go to committee, where previous schemes of that type have been sort of unpopular with local councillors. You can understand why some members of the public might think developers are trying to sort of bypass sort of existing protocols, existing systems to get schemes through. So there's definitely a trust issue there. But transparency, I was really pleased. I participated in the Kensington and Chelsea Council's first virtual planning meeting on the 9th of April. And you can see one of the councillors responding to a comment afterwards to say, we had nearly 200 members of the public at one point, one of the largest audiences for the planning committee. These cases had no residents to support or object to, but clearly people are registering, going on board, wanting to learn a little bit more about what's happening. So the opportunity is there. So now for the good, the bad and the ugly, what have I discovered over the past couple of weeks? Well, firstly, I should say local authorities are finding their feet, and some councils have to go first. And the ones who are going first are likely to sort of hit the bumps in the road. So they are quickly responding to a brand new situation. No one predicted this even sort of 3 months ago. So we have to recognise this is a new world and we are learning as we are going. I do think it's making the system more accessible and transparent. There have been a number of councils that have now said more people have logged on than would have attended the normal sort of planning committee numbers. That's a good thing. There's lots of guidance now coming out from the Planning Officers Society, from the Planning Advisory Society. Councils are talking on Twitter. There's a lot of learning by doing, which is a good thing. There's guidance out there. You don't need to sort of start from scratch. Next slide. And if there's any sort of local authority individuals on this today, I would just recommend there 2 pieces that have been put out by 2 particular councils. Leeds City Council have put out a briefing note as to how they're going to use virtual planning meetings. It's a 3 to 4 page document, well worth looking through. And Guildford Council have done something similar, talking about how they want to ensure public participation continues in the planning system over the next few months. They are 2 very good documents that I would recommend to anyone on this webinar. Next slide. And also Lichfield. So you've got communities, you've got charities putting forward advice, you've got local authorities putting advice, and the private sector, Lichfield. For those that don't know, Lichfields have done research of all local authorities across the country to sort of learn how they're adapting and evolving. And again, I would highlight this particular link to them. So there's lots of good stuff happening and we should be highlighting that. Now for the bad. Public participation has been limited for some local councils. They've been struggling with the technology, so they've not had as much participation as they probably would have in a sort of a physical manner. There doesn't seem to, not every council seems to be testing before they actually start the planning committee meetings. And I've now been on 2 different council meetings whereby councillors have not been there and they've had to be traced from people phoning them up while the planning committee is taking place. It's not looked very good if you were a new member of the public logging on to sort of learn how people are participating. We need to trace our councillors. We need to test our sort of technology beforehand. We need to ensure that everyone who is coming on knows how to use the software, knows how to sort of download it, knows how to sort of engage. And voting procedures could sort of be perceived as undemocratic, and I will touch on that shortly. But I would sort of, and I put a slide up there from Broxtowe Borough Council, I'd sort of highlight them up as a good example as well. They cancelled their meeting because of a number of issues with technology. So they decided to sort of hold the meeting and postpone it. They're now redoing that meeting on Monday coming. So fair play to them for sort of accepting that the technology wasn't working. So they're going to give it a second try. So next slide. Don't let the minority ruin what is happening. We all seen the BBC News reported about Somerset and the difficulties that they had. Don't let the minority ruin it. This is a positive thing. Let's sort of embrace it. Next slide. Voting. If there was one thing that I would sort of advise to councils, make sure the way that you're doing voting is perceived to be as democratic as possible. I was sent the picture on the left from a colleague in London. This is Newham Council, shared the screen and got everyone to vote automatically. As it's been so far, councils seem to be doing it one by one, and you could sort of argue that that's not exactly democratic and not exactly best practice. So if you only take one thing from this, go with the method left, get everyone to vote at the same time. The ugly, next slide. The ugly, we are sort of against the authorities, and so far 20% of councils are delegating all decisions to officers within the council, whether it's Manchester, Central Bedfordshire, Norwich. There's a number of authorities, and 20%, according to Lichfield, are delegating all decisions. That's wrong, and whilst Civic Voice is not completely campaigned against that at this moment in time, we will be monitoring that, because the technology is there. We can engage the community, we can engage people. There's no need for these decisions to be taken behind closed doors. Next slide. And the same, we've had a number of community groups approach us to say that all planning decisions should be stopped and should be paused. We don't agree with that. The economy needs to get going as quickly as possible. So just because communities don't necessarily want to sort of see planning decisions take place, they do need to take place. Next slide. And again, I go back to, it's all about trust and transparency. We are in a new world. We are learning as we go along. But my advice to sort of councils, council officers, councillors is think about trust, think about how transparent you are being. If the public believe you are making the right decisions in a transparent manner, they're more likely to support you to actually get the development made there quicker. And just one final slide. Civic Voice, we have been campaigning to see more digital come into the planning system because we feel as though it needs it. And what will the future be? Well, the Government's Building Better Commission report sort of published its findings earlier on in the year, and that has said itself that the system needs to go from analog to digital. We need to find more ways to get representative engagement and participation. So this is the future. We do need more people to sort of participate to ensure that we are representing everyone, but we need to always remember trust and transparency, and hopefully some of the systems and some of the talks that we've got later on in this session might sort of help us cover that. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Ian. I think the keywords trust and transparency are really important, and it was really helpful to hear sort of what's happening, some of the how councils are already adapting. We're shortly going to move on to Jason Hawthorne from VU.CITY, who's going to tell us a little bit about how VU.CITY is working with local authorities in the new way of working as a result of COVID-19. So over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Justin. So I'll just share my screen. So hopefully, Justin, can you just tell me that you're seeing my screen as VU.CITY?
I am.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. Just want to check that I don't talk to myself whilst I'm showing VU.CITY. So again, thank you very much for the invite this morning just to come along and talk to you about what we're doing here at VU.CITY. Interestingly enough, this is a sort of direction that we've been working on for over 4 years now, which is in effect to start to look at cities in a virtual way. We come from a background really of being able to describe developments and think about how a development affects and impacts its area and its surroundings, but also on a macro scale. So too often a lot of schemes that come forward are based on the immediate surroundings, and we really wanted to start to think about what the impacts would be if you looked at schemes in context of whole cities. So when we started building VU.CITY, and hopefully you can start to see now as I move around the model that we've created, this digital model, we recognized that we would need to create whole cities for this to be able to work for us at scale. So we started with about 80 square kilometres of London. We've now completed London, so we've got 1,617 square kilometres. So that's all of the local authority areas of London are covered. And we're now expanding across other UK cities. So in discussions with, I've got a horrible feeling I'm about to disconnect from the server. That's frustrating. Hang on. Let's see if I can. Yeah, sorry. We have a timeout on cloud, and I was hoping that I could keep it running, but it seems to have decided to kick me out whilst I'm in the middle of a presentation. Let's just jump back in. So just while this is loading, so one of the things in terms of building the cities is that we recognised that creating the model was fantastic, but it was running on very high spec PCs. And so what we've just released, and we've brought this forward, and I'm loading up now, as you can see, is actually VU.CITY in the cloud. So I'm just going through the process now of reloading VU.CITY. Cloud, as we've brought forward, it was due to launch in the summer, but we recognised that the need was now to be able to bring these cities forward. So these are all the cities that we're creating. So it saves me telling you all of the ones we've done actually, and I'll load London now. And bringing cloud forward has meant that our current user base has expanded significantly. And in fact, we're now running free trials with anybody who would like to come into VU.CITY and use it. We have 24 of the London local authorities already using VU.CITY, and some of them using this through the virtual planning committees as well. So picking up on the points that Ian was making, we actually see that this is really important right now to be able to demonstrate and see schemes coming forward and share them at a point where it's impossible to actually go to site and see what those changes look like. So apologies for the glitch, I'm back up and running. Nothing like a live show. So here we are, this is the model, we capture the model, we take aerial photography, and from that aerial photography we use a process called photogrammetry to actually build the models. And those models are then built by hand, so we get an accuracy of 15 centimetres. That's hugely important if we're thinking about using this for planning, because as we start to look at schemes, using something like Google Maps or Apple Maps just doesn't give us a sort of sense of accuracy that we could use. And having built the model, then we've created a number of tools that we can start to look at. So one of the first things we could do is we can take away any of the buildings. So if this was a developer thinking about a new scheme coming forward and they were looking at a site, they can select a building, and by selecting the building, they can then hide that site. So you've got a cleared site, and then think about what you might be able to build there. So really quickly, we can dive in and start to say, okay, I think we could put a new scheme on here. I'm not going to do anything too complex. I'll just build a tower and say, so here's our new site coming forward. I can adjust this. We could start to look at pulling the scheme apart and moving it around and adding more detail. But in principle, immediately we can start to see a new building in context. And being able to see that building in context, we can do a number of other things with tools. So we can look at, for instance, moving the sun through the model, and we can see the overshadowing, and we can see the impacts of that new scheme on overshadowing as well. But far more than that, we started, as I said at the beginning, we need to think about actually schemes in context of whole cities. Now in London and in many cities, we have protected views. So we have, in London is the London View Management Framework. And if I just turn on all of the views here, we'll start to see these are the viewing corridors that are protected to St. Paul's and Houses of Parliament in this case. So, and the model's loading, it loads in square kilometre tiles. So you see as I move around, it will just fluently load the next set of models that I need for that area. So these are all the protected viewing corridors to St. Paul's. And if I turn them all off and just turn one on, we can start to look at what they mean. The red is actually the protected viewing corridor, in this case from Alexandra Palace to St. Paul's. So you can't build a building taller that would interrupt that view, that is the red. The orange is an area to take into consideration. So you can see these three buildings. This is actually fairly new, but these buildings historically have been part of the fabric of London, probably before the viewing corridor was finalised. And the yellow is the silhouette protection. So we have to think about what turns up behind in terms of, will it change the silhouette protection of London? And we've done this not only for all of the viewing corridors, but also the river prospect views as well. So we can drop down to the river and we can start to see any of the views coming forward. But of course, they're really important for us if we're bringing new schemes forward and thinking about the transparency of planning. What we want to be able to do is to share the process between the developer creating a new scheme, sending that scheme to a local authority for pre-application discussions, but also use it as part of the consultation period as well. So in here we have a mechanism, it's called VU.CITY Drive, it's cloud-based as well, where architects and developers can share their models, or they can share them as part of the team or share them with the local authorities, which they're currently doing as well. So this is a scheme that was created in London by Farshid Masavi. She shared it with us because actually it's not a consented scheme, and I'll show you what was in a moment. And you can see here we've got all of the major formats in terms of the architectural packages, so AutoCAD, Revit, Rhino, SketchUp. In this case, it's already been geolocated and it was created in 3ds Max. And so now if I go to this new scheme, you'll see this blue tower that's arrived. So we can add far more detail than the sort of extrusion that I created as well. And you'll see now we're starting to see that tower in context of surroundings. But of course, cities evolve and change on a constant basis. So to keep VU.CITY up to speed, we track all of the planning applications of major planning applications, and we involve those and bring those into the model as well. So what we're now looking at here, for instance, in the city cluster, and if I move this timeline back to when we started building the model in 2016, that was what was consented and implemented at that point. And as I bring the timeline forward to current today's date, we're actually getting to a point here where we can see what's changing in the city and the cluster and surrounding. The difference between the models is that everything that is yellow has planning consent but not yet started on site. If it's blue, it's now been implemented and is on site. And if it's a really dark grey, as some of these buildings are in the distance here, they've gone through planning, they've been built and they're now operational. So we can also see what's changed. The building I brought in, so this building, you can see there's now a clash between the two. That's in principle because the yellow was what was consented. But if I turn that off for a moment and we start to look at the scheme and go back to our viewpoints, if I come then to the river prospect views and we look at, I think in this case, Tower, London Bridge downstream, let's just jump. No, beg your pardon. So these are the photographs that we've created so that you can see the different viewpoints. This one, Waterloo Bridge downstream. So now we have, at this scale, we have the photographs that we've taken of surveyed viewpoints. And at the other end of this scale is the model. You'll also note here that we've got trees. We've got over 10.4 million trees captured as part of our model capture. They're all height accurate and canopy width accurate as well. So, because they're really important in terms of assessing views. And as I slide this scale at the top, we're moving from the photograph and the model. So we have this merge between, which is a really excellent way of starting to be able to look at not only the accuracy of what we're creating, but in this case, this proposed scheme, which is sitting next to the walkie-talkie, you can see how it would have influenced the skyline. And so we can start to think about the aspects of new schemes being involved and presented. We have, it's probably worth pointing out as well, we're at the moment creating a publicly accessible version of VU.CITY, which will be called Your View. And we're doing some pilot projects with Southwark and RBKC as well about how we'll introduce this as part of planning. The idea essentially being that, again, as that transparency in this virtual world is that through the planning portals and the websites, instead of having to go through numerous different clicks on a website to finally get to see a scheme, you'll actually be able to come straight into an equivalent of VU.CITY and see what's been proposed and maybe leave comments and things. And we're also linking up with digital data providers for consultation, such as Commonplace and Built ID and others that we've been having discussions with. Because the integration and that transparency is hugely important, never more so now. So hence the reason that we've pushed cloud so hard to bring it forward, and it's been our kind of efforts to try and help and engage on that basis. Not all views are going to be the predicated views, so we can also look at creating any view, which of course, given that we can't go to site at the moment, this is probably the best way that you're going to be able to understand and see a space such as the area that we're looking at now. So I can create test views, I can select the building in question, and now I can add cameras anywhere I choose. So let's put a couple of cameras down here on the ground, and you'll see the images arriving as I create the views. This is a fantastic way to start scoping the views that would be required as part of planning. So in terms of being able to assess views for townscape, it's really quick and easy to be able to put images and views anywhere we choose on the ground, and and be able to see how much of the scheme we can see and whether or not that view should be carried through and be part of a verified view. So we can also click on buildings and take views from buildings. I'm conscious of my time, so I'm moving quite quickly. One of the other things is that given the accuracy of the models that we've created, it's a fantastic platform to start to look at data and data overlays in terms of GIS data. So we can look at things like air pollution here, and in terms of air pollution, we're now starting to see that in 3 dimensions rather than 2 dimensions. So you can see the impacts on streets. Now, this was actually data that was provided by King's College London going back a little way. There's a lot of work going on with data at the moment, and I'm sure that if we were looking at the city as it stands currently, be big differences currently between what we see, and would make an amazing benchmark if we could capture that. We can also bring in live data as well. We've also got point data. So Historic England use VU.CITY to look at their schemes and give their voice to planning applications coming forward. This is all the listed buildings in London, and if you click on it, it'll give you the detail around those listings. We can also, I'm hoping, jump to live cameras. So looking at London currently at the moment, for instance, we have links to the TfL cameras. So if I click on one of these, typical, I've used one that's not running. Let's see if we can find another. So this is a camera not far outside our office, actually, in Waterloo. So there we go. So there's a live camera showing you what's actually happening on the streets of London right now, and clearly a lot quieter than we would normally expect at this time in the morning, crossing Waterloo Bridge, although a bit more traffic here. So the idea for us, and to sort of wrap up, and I know it's a bit of a whistle stop in terms of what we're doing with VU.CITY, is that having started on a basis of realizing that virtual cities and creating, in effect, a digital twin was going to be hugely important for us going forward, just in terms of assessing schemes coming forward. That accelerated disruption that we're seeing from COVID and lockdown means that it plays a bigger part than it ever has. And I don't really feel that we're going to go back to the old normal, that it will be a new normal. And even as we come out of COVID, we hope the VU.CITY, especially now we're cloud-based and everybody can gain access to it, is really going to be transformational in terms of that transparency and being able to see what's happening and giving everybody a sense of being able to comment and being engaged and involved and comment on schemes coming forward. I think that's probably my turn to stop sharing and hand back to you, Justin.
Thank you very much, Jason. That was really interesting to hear about VU.CITY's work. So just a quick reminder, when you put your Q&A questions at the bottom, make sure you indicate to who you're asking the question to. And I'll hand over to Michelle and Claudia from Unboxed to hear about the work they're doing on the back office for planning system remotely.
Thanks, Justin. And just at that point, I can see here that my doorbell's gone off, but hopefully you can't hear that. So anyway, I'm Michelle. And if you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. I work with Claudia at Unboxed, and we create digital products and services that solve user problems. And despite the pandemic, we're still doing that. We're working remotely, and Claudia is going to kind of explain how our ways of working have changed as we're at a distance. I guess we don't just work with planning, but the project we're going to talk about is specific to this webinar. And over the last year, we've been working with Civic Council and other partner councils with support from MHCLG's local digital fund to kind of explore what a user-centered back office planning system can look like. Our aim really is quite simple. We want to make it quicker and easier for planning teams to be able to assess planning applications from householders. So these types of applications tend to be a bit simpler, but they still take up a lot of time. So that's why we're starting there. In the long run, we do hope to be able to then scale this up to handle kind of the assessment of much larger developments as well. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So why are we doing this? I guess one of the issues is the existing back office systems that planning teams use tend to just really slow planners down. So they're hard to use, they're not very intuitive. It's really hard to navigate and find the information they need. to assess applications. They often have to refer to other systems. These systems often can't integrate because the back office system doesn't allow for that. So they're constantly kind of having to rely on manual processes. So copying and pasting information from one system, from one screen to another, renaming documents numerous times. And also a lot of these systems, they just can't be used kind of on any other type of device as well, just because of the way they've been designed. So when a planning office, for example, goes out and does a site visit, they will tend to take photos, make notes. They usually have to do this and then email it to themselves to process later on when they're back in the office. Also, just one last point on this, one of the big problems is that these back office systems, the way data is generated during the assessment process tends to be kind of inside Word documents or in templates that then get published as a PDF on the planning register. So it's really hard to kind of extract data from, or key data points, because the data is not very structured, and that makes it difficult to report both at a kind of local and national level, but also to kind of make it easier to, for example, to automatically push out updates to applicants. Applicants often feel like, it goes into, they apply for something, it goes into a black hole, and eventually they'll hear from something. And this is partly because of these systems. So these are some of the problems that we're looking to resolve with our back office planning system, which we refer to as BOPS. And now I'm going to hand over to Claudia, who can talk a bit about how we're working during these times.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Can I have the next slide, please, Kate? Wonderful, thanks. So right now, the arrow's moved, but we're actually in beta, so it should be to the left a little bit. We ended alpha in December, and since April we started beta, which means that we're starting to build and refine our options. And we're taking the insights that we learned from discovery and alpha into this phase. Next slide, please. At Unboxed, we have principles that we work towards independent of the project. So we're user-centered, agile, open and transparent, collaborative, flexible and responsive. And throughout the presentation, you'll kind of see how these are embedded within all the ways we work. But even though we're in a pandemic and on lockdown, we're still ensuring that we're sticking to these principles, because that really means that the products we create and build will work for our users. Next slide, please. So today I'm going to talk mainly about how we collaborate, prototype, test, develop and share, and compare how we used to work with how we're currently working. Next slide, please. So collaborating is really the basis for everything we do. We make sure that we collaborate within an internal multidisciplinary team, as well as with external partners. One of the ways we do this is ensuring that we have a content expert embedded within the team. So right now, Jack Ricketts, he's a town planner at Civic Council. He works with us every day, and that really ensures that we're in touch with the products that we're building. And we also work with partners and stakeholders, and we used to meet them in person, but now we're meeting with them remotely. As for our internal team, we used to use online tools, but we would also work in person on the online tools. We would also print things out and use sticky notes. But now we're trying out different tools to ensure that we can still collaborate in the same way. So one of the programs and tools we're using is Miro. So it's a website where multiple people can go on at the same time, and we can brainstorm. We have like digital sticky notes that kind of replicate the design process. And we're able to brainstorm that way. So as a group, we've made a product roadmap and a feature roadmap, and we've also done some pre-sprint planning by being able to brainstorm and user stories. And it's just a great way to work together, but obviously separately as well. Next slide, please. For prototyping, so I'm a designer, and so we also prototype and we test during our sprints. And so before in alpha, Michelle created the prototypes on paper and digital prototypes in Figma. And this was great to start understanding the building blocks. But now as we're moving more towards building, I've taken those Figma prototypes and I've made them onto the Gov.UK prototyping kit as a way to test. I think for remote testing, it's made it a bit easier because they can access the link quite easily, and everything's quite intuitive of what should be clickable or not, because we're using the Gov UK patterns. And through that, we've been able to create a login screen, a list of applications, and then the basic planning officer and manager journeys with the least amount of friction. And that's been a good start to working, prototyping remotely. And anyone can look online at the prototype we're working on. Next slide, please. So once we've iterated on the prototype, then we always test it with users. In alpha, 30 people across 11 councils were interviewed and tested in person. And synthesis would also be done in person, often using sticky notes. So I think this has been one of the biggest changes, is figuring out how we test. So right now we've tested now with 7 people using video conferencing and a transcription tool. And then once the interviews are transcribed, we then put them onto another tool called Dovetail. And this allows us to look at the transcript and then tag it with different categories. And then we can look across categories and pull out insights from those. And then to present these to the team, we've then been using Miro again. So we have a Miro board with all the different user flows. And then we add in what the insight was from that screen with supportive quotes. And then we look at ways to change it through the next iteration. There have been some surprises with testing. So because back. Oh, can we go back 2 slides? Thank you. Perfect. So because we've been testing remotely and our users are local planners, some of them don't have the equipment or their equipment doesn't allow them to use certain tools that we need. So they've been really flexible, which has been really nice, and tested on their iPads and other devices. And really this is beneficial to us because we can ensure that BOPS is versatile in the future. It needs to be responsive for any device, and it needs to be flexible in that if planners go to a site visit, then they can access it off of their work computer. So it's really been nice to test remotely and come up with different ways of testing. And back to Michelle for the next slide.
Thanks, Claudia. So as we said at the start, the arrow was in the wrong place. We're not live just yet, but we are building this software and this product at the moment. And usually we would be based in our in-house. Our developers would be in the office. Usually they're sat together, they pair program, and this is where they'd usually be based kind of around one workstation, where one developer would be in the driving seat coding and the other would be reviewing their code. And then they swap over. They're still doing this now, but at a distance. So they're connecting via Zoom, for example, and then they are able to give consent so that one can kind of take control of the app, do the coding while the other reviews, and then swap over. So that's still happening. In some senses, it's a little bit easier. So I've heard from my developers, partly because obviously in an office, an open plan office, when you're working together for a concentrated period of time, there's always that anxiety that you might be interrupting the rest of the office. So of course that's gone away now, but it's great that we're still able to kind of pair up that way and kind of learn from each other and develop in the right way. If you could go to the next slide, please. Thank you. As Claudia mentioned before, kind of collaboration is a really kind of key principle for how we work. And we do like to work in the open, and it's really important for us that we share what we're doing and get feedback on that. For example, we normally would do this in person, of course. We have fortnightly show and tells, we demo our product, we have playbacks from user research where we share insights and talk about changes to the prototype and how we're going to change the prototype again and test again following previous research. And we also have meetings with our partners. All of this is still happening. We're just doing it online now. For example, our development team are working really closely with Open Systems Lab, who are developing a system to reduce invalid planning applications. We're really keen that our product integrates with that, but we also think we can share learning from each other. So we're having kind of video calls. We're also blogging, and we're publishing our week notes online as we would do in normal times. But something else as well is that we are still kind of keen to make sure we are sharing what we're doing. So we're working kind of in sprints of 2 weeks. And then we kind of reflect back, look, this is what we've built in this time, this is what we've learned. And we share that with all partners and anyone really who's interested. As I said, it's usually in the office, so you can see a picture there. From Alpha, we were generally based in Southwark Council. Now we're doing it remotely. We've been using tools, for example, we use Zoom. However, I think it is worth picking up on that this can make us vulnerable sometimes when we kind of use some of these technologies, and particularly when we're really keen to kind of work as openly as possible. You may have seen reports in the news, and Ian touched on this as well, particularly with kind of intruders interrupting calls and sharing abusive or disturbing content. And unfortunately, this did happen to us last week. So following this experience, we are kind of reviewing which tools we use, particularly if we want to use Zoom for that purpose, or also looking at alternatives such as streaming directly to YouTube. However, it's really important for us that that doesn't stop us. We will still continue to share and collaborate. And I think it's also worth touching on the response that we had after that experience, which was from some of the people who are probably in this audience as well, was so positive and supportive. And I think that's a reflection of the relationships we have built from collaborating and sharing in the past. So we're going to carry on working that way, but just make sure we're kind of looking more into what technology we use to do that. And to the final slide, please. Thank you. So we've adapted the way we're working, and the people we're designing for have also had to change the way they are working as well. And for them, it's probably been a bit more of a steeper learning curve than us as a digital agency, where we're already kind of set up in some ways to work on different sites, depending on the projects we're working on. Working at home hasn't been too much of a challenge. Building systems like BOPs, we do believe will kind of help planning teams to adapt more in future, to work more flexibly, to work in a way that kind of suit their needs better. But we're still building this, and we're really interested in looking at what's happening right now. So some of the examples that Ian shared, and particularly the reports from Leeds and Guildford, I'm kind of keen to go and have a look at those, because we'd like to learn, okay, what are planning teams doing right now? How have they had to adapt, and how can we use that learning, one, to kind of help guide us in the product that we're building, but I think it will be interesting just to kind of see, you know, what is the new norm, what sticks around as a result of this experience. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michelle. It's really interesting to hear about your take on the new norm. We are going to move into the next 10 minutes of Q&As from attendees. Just we are mindful that we have quite a lot of Q&As and a limited amount of time, so we'll do our best to answer them, and I'll hand over to Kate with some of the questions.
Hi, everyone. We've actually had about 20 questions come in, and we've only really got time for one question for each organisation. A lot of the questions I can see in the Q and answer are actually technical ones for Jason at VU.CITY. So what I'll suggest is after this, we will link up with Jason and make sure he can get back to the group on these questions, and we'll try and pick up ones afterwards. So one question for Michelle and Claudia Unboxed that has come in from Mark Dorfman is around the fact that there are now quite a lot of PlanTech groups and companies working on similar parts of the planning system, and there's more popping up during the COVID-19 times. Do you think there's a risk of firms starting to compete with each other? And do you think there needs to be more collaboration in the system for different groups and different authorities to be looking at different parts of the system and coming and learning together?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think it also is part of kind of, so the way we're developing this, we are a digital agency, and we've been funded from the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government under their local digital fund. And the whole aim of this is kind of to solve kind of common problems across different councils. So one, we're making sure that what we're building works for lots of different councils and all the different needs they have, both kind of in a city or more in the countryside, for example. But we're also working with, we're aware of other products. So we're focusing on household applications in a back office system. Obviously, that is needs to work with and integrate with kind of the front office facing system. So something, you know, where the public apply, also with services and products being developed by other agencies. So one of the problems with back offices at the moment is that they can't integrate with any of these products, and there's so many great things happening. So you just saw, like, for example, VU.CITY. None of these systems could integrate with anything like that. So everything has to be used standalone, and we're really keen to not kind of recreate that problem. Also, I think we mentioned Open Systems Lab. They are looking at how to reduce the amount of invalid applications that come in. We're working with them to make sure that what we're building is complementary to that. So it's kind of ours is the next step. So we definitely don't want to kind of compete and create the same thing, because, well, what's the point? But if there's anybody who knows, kind of has heard of anything specifically that seems very much like what we're doing, we'd love to find out about it, and then we can perhaps go and have a conversation with those people and see how we can collaborate.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. Jason, I had one for you on VU.CITY, and that was around, we've heard that VU.CITY is being used by, or is starting to be used by, some local authorities for pre-app discussions. We heard quite a lot about the what's worked well on VU.CITY, but kind of in the tone of Ian's presentation, could you tell us a bit about your bad and ugly experiences and the challenges you've encountered in using it in pre-app discussions?
Yeah, so just to say, actually, I've been trying to answer as many of the questions online as well, because I saw loads of questions. So have a read, and I've been trying to put some answers up there if you've asked me a question directly. Yeah, I suppose the challenges we've had have been around importing models from architects, and it's been a you know, to begin with, a fairly steep learning curve in terms of geolocating models and getting them accurate so that they import into VU.CITY correctly. But as we've gone on, not only have we fixed many of those problems and made it easier and created different ways to actually import those models, that lots of architects now, as they're subscribing, once that workflow is a given, that it actually becomes very straightforward and easy to do. And the other element to that has solved many of those problems was based around how those models were shared originally, and thinking about making sure that they were, whilst they were confidential, that there was still a level of protection afforded to those models when they were just in pre-app. So that's the whole VU.CITY drive that we've created, which now allows sharing of models between different sort of constituent parts of planning, from the developers, the architects, the local authorities, without having to share those models with anybody else. So when I imported that model into VU.CITY, there's only us looking at it today that are seeing that. So no one else running VU.CITY is seeing what I'm doing. So I think we've learned a lot of lessons as we've gone along in terms of what we anticipated, but recognized sort of more issues from our users, if you like. I think the other element for this is cloud has solved a lot of our very serious technical issues. We built VU.CITY. It's a significant piece of programming to build the whole of a city the size of London and the other cities that we're doing. And so cloud has answered huge problems for us, which, as I say, we were really expecting to launch in June, but we've moved heaven and earth to try and get it launched, because we recognised everybody needs it now. The planning committees need VU.CITY, and so cloud is helping to address that. But the final point there for us is there's still a nervousness about using something like that in terms of technology. You can see even today, I'm like, wow, it's dropped out on me and I've got to start it again. We're creating a way and means that you can record movies out of VU.CITY as well as a user. So you'll be able to click your points within the platform and make your movie, and then just show your movie, which still gives you all of the access, all of the availability and tools, but you can kind of control the environment, which we can see with technology is going to be really important too.
Brilliant. For Ian, we've had quite a few questions come in, and two of them are related actually, around if you are a local resident or an interested member of community, how do you actually find out about these digital planning committee meetings? How are residents being reached? And also alongside that, how are local authorities making sure that people aren't digitally excluded from consultation in these times?
Two interesting questions. The first one, I think there's a job for local authorities to do. And the first few that we've engaged with, we've gone out and we found them ourselves. And if local authorities really want to engage and get voices from everyone participating, they have to be more proactive. So I think it was Kensington and Chelsea, Broxtowe Borough Council, they've been using social media to push out that these digital meetings are happening. And then it's a matter of visiting the council website and registering. What I would say is that the go-to platform seems to be MS Teams, but a lot of members of the public are using Zoom. So we have had quite a bit of feedback from community members who have tried to participate that they don't have a Microsoft license, so they've had challenges actually logging in. So councils may have to think about how they use technology that works for everyone. And what was the second question? Sorry.
It was also obviously now when there aren't public forums where people can come together, how are local authorities ensuring they can reach people that are might be digitally excluded?
Well, this is in the same context. If we go back 3 months ago, we were talking about people who couldn't attend meetings. So if there was a planning meeting on during the daytime, people who would work may not be able to participate. So as we are 6 weeks, 7 weeks into this whole world changing, these are the issues that councils and the sector need to get to understand. And the likes of VU.CITY, commonplace, we've heard about digital platforms. Technology won't just work at the planning committee meeting. It has to come right the way throughout the system. It has to start at the front with the pre-app stuff that Jason was talking about. It has to become much more accessible. And if we can embrace technology from start to decision, the decision should be rubber stamped essentially. If we can make the system more transparent through technology, well, actually, people will be able to engage physically, digitally, or in a method that they prefer. But the likes of VU.CITY, commonplace, all these different systems coming together, that actually swings power back to community. Because if it's all transparent, everyone can see what is happening, and then the decisions are there for us all to discuss.
Ian, just to pick up on that, I mean, we see that absolutely in that being able to integrate VU.CITY into Commonplace, and we're working with Mike at Commonplace and showing what we're able to do together. I totally agree. It's really the background we've come from as the reason to build VU.CITY in the first place was actually to make a much more transparent basis of being able to look at schemes and make those decisions about them. So we're all for it. And I mean, actually, it's my background. I've done 20 years in terms of consultation, and I find the further and wider you can spread the net and more people you can get involved, and the more open and transparent you can be about what change looks like, the better a discussion that you have. Most of the elements I've ever seen through consultation are based on fear, and it's a fear of not knowing what that change would be and its impacts. And if you can click on your bedroom window and take a view out of it and see what the new scheme's going to look like, at least you can assess it and know that there's some understanding of what that means to you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Ian. They're both great responses. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for in terms of questions. We will try and get the questions that remain unanswered answered after the webinar and circulate them to attendees. And a lesson learned for us for next time is to leave more time for panelist questions, because there's obviously a lot of interest in this topic. So back over to Justin.
Thank you, Kate. I think just to wrap up, what's really interesting is an understanding that there is some common grounds already emerging in this climate, and particularly in the way that councils are starting to work. And I think what Ian said about councils not needing to adapt and not being left behind, and that kind of brings me in a slight segue into what we're launching today, which is actually called the PlanTech Challenges. If you could just flip to the next slide, please, Kate. So our PlanTech Challenges, you can access at this website here at the bottom, but also we will be sharing that with you at the end of the presentation alongside it. The idea here is to develop a consortia around a specific theme in planning, a consortia of local authorities who'd be interested in pursuing common goals and common challenges. And so the idea is identifying what that common challenge is, and then each sort of invests a little bit into that common challenge so that we can resolve it together and collectively. And I think there's a greater power in numbers rather than everyone doing their own little thing. So it would require small investments from local authorities and working together to solve these problems collaboratively. The first challenge we're going to be looking at is the process of digitizing local plan engagement. It will be a discovery, so the first stage of building innovation tools. And that theme was selected following the first round of surveys that we held a few months ago around the issue. And that particular issue of local plan engagement, public engagement, resonated quite widely. So if you're interested in these challenges, getting involved, becoming part of the consortia, or even shaping what the next challenges will be that we'll delve into, please do access the website. All the information will be there when it goes live. There'll be collaboration documents and more information about how the challenge works. And you can also contribute to the discussion, as I said, of future challenges. So if we could just move to the next slide, please. Just a very quick housekeeping. If you're interested in, or if you enjoyed today's webinar, there are more coming up. The next one is on the 6th of May, and it's the data for local resilience and recovery. And you can access and register all of them on the Catapult website at the bottom of the screen. And just to close, so I guess next slide, please. Just to close then, again, thank you very much for your time and for joining. We really enjoyed having you here. We hope you enjoyed the content, hearing from our speakers. We do apologize that we couldn't get to all the questions now. We'll try and copy them and email them to our panelists and then send out responses. We will endeavor to do so. There will be a survey that will be sent around about the event. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are, how it went, and if there was anything we could improve on, or if you just generally enjoyed the content. And the session, as well as links to the challenges, will be shared afterwards. Finally, look out for our all digital white paper, which will be released today as well on the Catapult website. There's information on, it's basically our critique of planning software today and the pathway to a more open, innovative, and interoperable planning software landscape. So hopefully interesting reading for everyone. Again, thank you very much for coming.
Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks again to all the speakers.
Thank you.